Hello everyone, this is Caleb Simpson, and you are watching my 100% walkthrough for The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword for Nintendo Wii. So welcome everyone to Skyview Temple, the first dungeon of the game, and I think Nintendo did a really good job with this dungeon. I like that it's not super tutorial-y. There is some optional things, but you can skip past a lot of those, so you can just dive right into the puzzles, and a lot of the puzzles are pretty engaging and interesting, so I just really like that. Now we did get the braced shield, so now that that's been upgraded, we need to re-equip that, so make sure you do that. You can save it here at the statue if you like, and then continue onwards. There is these cobwebs throughout the dungeon, and these things will actually latch onto you if you get too close. You have to shake your controllers to get loose. Now, if you touch even an edge of them or whatever, that'll catch you, and this is a little bit awkward. It's kind of hard. It takes several seconds to get away, so if there's enemies nearby, like some of these keys up ahead, then they can be kind of awkward. However, I do have a tip to get through them quicker, is depending on the shape of it, you can actually just roll through them pretty easily. There's certain ones in the game that you can very easily roll through. However, even if you don't have a good space where you can roll through them, if you just roll through them anyways, then you'll at least appear on the other side, and you can actually shake loose very quickly. So you don't have to deal with the cobwebs very much if you don't want to. You can stab through them if you want, but honestly, you can just roll through almost all of them in the entire game. Now here you'll notice there's an amber relic that's up on the side, and you can actually reach both rupees and stuff with your sword, but you can also do that with treasure. At the far end of the hallway we have some bamboo, and you can smack those to clear a path so you can climb the vines. However, our goal here is just to hit the crystal switch to open the door, and you don't have to climb up there and hit it with your sword. You can actually use the slingshot itself. So if you strafe off to the left or right a little bit, you can actually just ignore the Deku Baba entirely and just hit the crystal switch from down here, which will open the door. So you don't have to climb up there at all if you don't want to. Now, if you do want to do that, then this is how they're kind of implying, this is how you solve that puzzle if you need to. The Deku Baba will smack you when you get to the top of the vines, but if you hit it with the slingshot first, it'll be stunned, which allows you to defeat it, so then you can smash the crystal switch with your sword. So that's the two ways that you can complete this puzzle. So whenever you see these bamboo points with the glowing hotspots, you can always smack them until they're down level with you, and then you can smack the glowing portion, and this will give you some rupees. Now usually it only gives green rupees, which is only worth 1, but occasionally it can drop blue or even red rupees, which can be worth a lot. However, there's other things, like clumps of grass and stuff like that is usually more beneficial because they'll give you more rupees than that. I don't know, I just don't really think it's super worth it to do the bamboo myself, but I just wanted to show it real quick that it's a thing. You saw those in Farron Woods, and so a lot of you probably are already aware of this. Now, there's a tablet in this next room off to the left that gives you a clue about how to proceed, and once you get up onto this upper platform, then Fi will glow on your controller there as well, so you can press down on the D-pad to summon her. And she just confirms that that tablet was indeed talking about her, probably. And she's just reminding you that you can always press down on the D-pad at various locations, and she'll give you tips about what to do, but also that you can do that with targeting enemies or objects. So if you Z-target things, then you can press down on the D-pad, so I'm going to do so here. This is just to show. So if you ever get to a point where you're not sure what to do with something, you can always ask Fi for help. This new obstacle will always look at the tip of your sword. So what you want to do is make sure that your controller is calibrated, first of all, but then you just circle around, and as long as you're not too close, the eye will close if you do that. So if you just stand far enough back where it's actually looking at you, then just rotate your controller around, and this will cause the eye to get dizzy. I feel like this game's a little bit ridiculous with the amount of helpful tips they give you, or you can talk with Fi, who is context sensitive, but also on objects and stuff like that you're targeting, but also you have the fortune teller and you have the Sheikah Stone. There's so many different options for getting help with puzzles. And I'm not sure why they decided that was a good idea to have or I don't know why they felt like it was so necessary, I guess. In this next hallway, you can totally just run through here. The Mew aren't really a problem if you're running far enough, then they just fall off anyways, but you can just slowly work your way through here, and you can smack the Mew as well to defeat them as well, too. But defeat the Deku Baba as you slowly make your way through if you don't want to just run past them. But on this next wall, if you turn around, there is some Waltulas here on the vines, and you can smack them with the slingshot to work your way up. And here we have some wooden panels that you can smack through with your sword. This creates a shortcut back to the entrance of the dungeon. Now, as a comment about that shortcut, the only reason for unlocking it is really just to make it a little easier in case you have to go back to the entrance. Say you go to town and get some fairies or something, or potions or whatever, and then you come back here. That shortcut's just a little bit nicer. However, later in the game, we do return to the Skyview Temple, but that shortcut is already unlocked automatically, whether or not you smack it. So just a quick observation about that. Continuing onwards, you want to smack the crystal switch that is above the doorway on the right, and this will open the door. However, we actually want to open the left door at first, which is the one we want to go to. So there's a clue. The clue for that is that you need to hit a crystal switch as well. And if you look down in the water, you'll see there's actually a breadcrumb trail of rupees. This is to draw your attention to the crystal switch that is over on this side as well. Now you can actually come back here later and hit that crystal switch. However, it's just a little bit easier because the water level is low. So anyway, the efficient thing to do is actually to take the doorway on the left. In my opinion, it's just a little bit faster this way. But inside you'll see there's a Bokoblin off to the side, so go ahead and defeat it. And if you look off to the left, there's actually a new enemy, and we can't actually fight this guy from this direction. So there's not really too much you can do right here at the moment. I think actually you could otherwise smack the... If you really want to defeat it, you could technically hit as much of the... cobwebs as you can, and this will actually cause it to release and you have to defeat it. Now I won't actually dealing with that right now. You'll notice there's an alcove off to the right, and this is actually where we want to go. So if you just want to skip ahead, you can actually just jump onto the bridge on the left, and that will actually allow you to smack the stuff in the alcove. That's what our objective is here. But if you can swing onwards, you can open the door up ahead, and this will lead to a chest containing the dungeon map. I do think that they did a really good job with the dungeon maps in this game. Like, they're actually pretty useful, and every dungeon has something unique that the dungeon map provides that tells you where to go. Like a lot of Zelda games, the map is kind of worthless. Like, you could do the whole dungeon without looking at the map and it doesn't really matter, but this game actually gives you clues about how to proceed onward. And it's like, honestly, it's all optional clues. Like, if you already know what to do, it's fine, but a lot of those things you wouldn't suspect on your own. And I think they handled it really well. So the dungeon map is like, actually like this super cool, like, I don't know, adventure genre discovery kind of ideal, you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like they handled it really well, is I guess what I'm trying to say. So Fi makes the observation that you can't use beacons when you're in the dungeon. Not that that really matters too much, but we wouldn't be able to look at the sky to see where the beacon is anyways, so it's a little bit awkward. Now you'll notice on your map it shows that there's some X's on your map. One of them is in the room that we just left. So this was in that alcove that I was just mentioning, and so we want to go and investigate that. So anyways, the dungeon map is optional in all of these dungeons. You don't have to get it at all, but it does make certain things easier, or like it just draws attention to stuff. So if you already know where to go, it doesn't really matter too much. At this point, my controller got way uncalibrated, so you'll see my sword is like, it's calibrated somewhere behind me. So anyway, so I just finally abandoned that idea, and I was like, okay, I'm going to fix this real quick. So just a couple regular sword slashes away from an enemy, and that fixed it, so now it's all working properly. Now, if a Deku Baba gets too close to you, well, this is Quadra Baba in this case, if it gets too close to you and you can't defeat it in time, you want to either use a shield bash or backflip. Generally speaking, I use backflips as like my panic button. So off to the right, there is actually some Skulltulas, and they're sitting on these cobwebs, and you want to smack the glowing portion that is on their bottom side. So what you want to do is simply stab them. So make sure your controller is calibrated well, but then you can just stab them a couple times. This will defeat them. Now, this actually makes them super easy because we're attacking them from behind. They're totally vulnerable to us, and so you can just defeat them very easily. And I think most people are cool with just defeating these guys, but if you really don't want to deal with them, or spiders freak you out or whatever, you can totally just jump in the water and climb the vines nearby, or you can actually just like use those vines again to swing back and forth. I forgot to show this stone tablet earlier, but whenever your map has X's on it, it's usually some kind of objective that you have to do. I actually think it's I'm not sure that there's an entire point in the game where you ever have an X on your map that is not required. So just as an observation, and after you complete whatever the objective is that X was indicating, then the X disappears off your map. So just a quick comment about that. If you ever see an X, you need to go to that. But yeah, getting the dungeon map is optional, and also defeating all those enemies is optional in that room. All you have to do is swing to the bridge, and then hit the crystal switch, then swing onwards again, and then go through the door where you get the dungeon map and hop down, and that will just save you some time. And that's the fastest way to get through that room. But yes, next, go into the right room, and how you get there is you hit the crystal switch that is above the doorway. And there's actually a tablet behind the Skulltula here that I believe all it says is it gives you a clue about saying that there's a secret above and a secret below. And I think this is actually referring to the crystal switches that are in the previous room, how there was a lower one that was in the water area. And that was how you opened the doorway on the left. So this is just a clue about how to get to it in case you didn't realize that, because this is most likely the first room that people entered. But anyways, I like to go get the dungeon map first because it like gets rid of some of the backtracking, but you can do the rooms in either order. Now if you look at your map, you'll notice that there is actually a small room off to the right side of the map on the east, and there is actually a little hole that is down here in the water. So if you crawl through, you'll see that there's a crystal switch on top of the statue up above. So go ahead and smack that and then continue onwards. And this shows a quick cinematic of the main room, and you'll see there's actually a log. I don't really feel like that cinematic was super obvious, but there's a log that is now reaching some vines that we can now climb as well. So that was the trick there that allowed us to progress. So climb up the vines, then crawl through the hole, and here I was showing earlier how you could roll through those vines as well, or the cobwebs. So you don't actually have to slash them all, you can just roll through them every time, and you get out of it super quick, so it's super nice. Now if you look back at your map, you'll notice that there's actually a chest there, but we can't get to it from that previous area where we just were. But if you look off to the side where you would normally go through that door, you'll see there's actually a log over here that now that we've raised both the water levels by entering both the east and west doors, we can now climb on top of this so we can reach the vines. This allows us to reach a doorway on this upper ledge, which leads to the southern portion of the eastern room. I'm always impressed with video games when I feel like they introduce mechanics very well, and this is a good example of that. In the previous room on the far west side, we had to defeat some Skulltulas that were in the way, or we had the option of defeating them, and they were super vulnerable. They couldn't do anything to you, but it made you aware that these enemies have a vulnerable portion on their bottom side. So now we have a Skulltula, and you have to actually smack it with left and right strikes to make it spin around, so that and then you wait until its backside is vulnerable, or facing towards you, so that you can smack it. So it might have been a little bit difficult if people weren't aware that you could do that, I guess. Wouldn't have been quite as obvious, but because they had the previous room where these Skulltulas were super vulnerable to us, it made it a lot more obvious. So I just feel like that's a really good game design, I guess. So I just find it impressive, especially for a first dungeon. So defeat the Skulltula by revealing its tender backside and smacking that vulnerable portion. We have two of those eye sentries. You want to just stand back and kind of in between them so that they're both looking at you at the same time. You got to get just kind of the sweet spot. Once you're there, go ahead and use your sword to make them dizzy, and then go ahead and open the chest to get a small key, which allows us to continue onwards. Return to the previous room, and you can hop off into the water. You can actually backflip over little walls and stuff. A lot of walls that you can actually in this game you can kind of run over a lot of the things like that, but even if you can't, a lot of small walls you can actually backflip over. So go ahead and open the locked door to the far north and then continue on into the second portion of the dungeon. So we don't have to deal with anything on that whole first half of the dungeon at all, so we're from here on out, we're just continuing on from here, which is actually pretty good. We have some nice shortcuts to get to this place. Now before you continue onwards, I would recommend you go save at the statue here off to the left, because we have a mini-boss coming up here very shortly. And this statue, actually I guess the title does say bird statue, but it's not technically a bird, it's just like a stone thing that does have wings. I think it's more like a bird wannabe statue. Now you can't actually fly to the surface with this thing at all, or fly to the sky, but you can use it to teleport back to the entrance of the dungeon if you want to. So go ahead and go back to the southern portions of this room and then smack the crystal switch that is above the doorway to open it. Then enter to confront the mini-boss. Alright, so Stalfos in this game I think are really cool, but all you have to do is just hit them from a vulnerable side. They're always blocking from two different directions, and you can smack them. If you hit them on their sword, they'll actually counterattack instead, so you just want to be careful. And you can even just pick a direction and then just wait until that side is vulnerable, because Stalfos are constantly changing which direction they're defending from. Now, if that all fails, you can't always just rely completely on shield bashes, and that works great. You counterattack with that, it just works really awesome. Now, actually, the best way to defeat them is actually to defeat them like you normally would with slashing your sword. However, use spin attacks when you do that. And all that means is you're just adding like a little shake. You just swing both the Wiimote and the nunchuck at the same time. This will consume some stamina, but you'll get in 2 hits at once. And you can actually defeat Stalfos very quickly doing that. Once it's defeated, go ahead and open the chest to get the dungeon item, which is the Beetle. This item allows you to fly around. You can collect things like hearts and rupees in a distance, but you can also smack things like crystal switches or even enemies. Most enemies it doesn't really do anything with. It'll just bonk off them. It'll mostly just alert them to your presence, like Bokoblins and stuff will freak out once it gets close. But otherwise, you can also, because it's slightly sharp, it will defeat weaker enemies. I think you can actually kill keys with it. So if you see some keys that are hanging out on the ceiling or something like that, you could technically smack them with this thing. However, it just makes the rest of them run around, which isn't really super helpful. But anyways, the other cool thing about it though is it is slightly sharp, so even though it does defeat keys, you can also use it to slice things. So it's really good for doing things like you can slice cobwebs and ropes and stuff like that, but also you can use it to slice the stems of Dekubabas. So there's Dekubabas that are in your way, whether or not they're hanging from the ceiling or on the ground, you can actually use the Beetle to slice their stems off so you can defeat them. So it's kind of interesting for portions where you need to jump somewhere, but there's a Dekubaba in the way. A good use to take care of them is actually to use the Beetle. So the door to the room is closed, and if you remember, we had to hit the crystal switch outside in order to open the door. So you want to use the Beetle through the opening that is in the ceiling, and then you can swing around and smack the crystal switch with the Beetle to open the door. Outside, you want to be careful because keys will constantly sneak up on you. This one actually totally abandoned me. I don't really know what the deal was with that. It was really aggressive, and then it changed its mind all of a sudden. But anyways, you want to use the Beetle, and one of the things you can do is you can actually defeat a lot of these Skulltulas. You don't have to. If you get close, they'll actually get aggressive and they'll come down and try and smack you. But you can actually just hit the slice their webbing, whatever that's, I think you can call that. I mean, their line. Slice their line that is holding them up, and then you can defeat them because they're vulnerable on the ground for a little bit. I think the Skulltulas are super cool. They're one of the coolest early game enemies because they have multiple ways, or they're just really engaging. Flipping them over, I think is a lot of fun. There's actually a lot of stuff that you can use your Beetle with in this particular room. There's a bunch of holes in the wall that you can explore, and there's also like a bunch of boxes that are held up by the cobwebs as well. So you can slice them if you like to break the contents of the box. And the one that you really want is the one that's right next to the save statue, and that actually always has like 20 rupees-ish. I think it either has red rupee or it has like 2 blue rupees, or like 3 blue rupees and some green rupees, or something like that. Whatever. It has about 20 rupees in it every time. Now, if you go to the backside of the giant bird statue that's in the middle of the dungeon here, you'll see that there's actually a piece of heart that is in the backside of it, and it's in this little enclosed area. And the switch to unlock the door is actually at the very top of the like neck of the bird statue. So you want to use the Beetle while standing on the backside of the, right behind the statue. You want to use the Beetle, point up, and then you have just enough time to reach the crystal switch that is on the inside the neck. This will open the doorway, which reveals a piece of heart. Now, if you've been following along with me, this is actually our 4th piece of heart total, which gives us an entire another heart container in time for this Skyview Temple boss, which is awesome. So you can use the Beetle on the various alcoves and on the other boxes in the room, but they don't really lead to much. Like, honestly, a lot of them only lead to like 5 rupees or maybe 10 rupees. It's just not really super worth the amount of time. There's actually some of them that have like a lot of mushrooms in the way from some directions and not others and such, so it's a little bit awkward. But the one hole that you do want to use is the one that is just above the doorway next to the bird statue. So you want to go ahead and use the Beetle on that, and this will reveal a crystal switch that is in there. And you can actually slice the Deku Babas along the way too, and this will kill them too, although it doesn't really accomplish anything for you. But go ahead and hit the crystal switch. This will open the doorway, which allows us to continue on to the west. In this room, just hop down. There's nothing we can do here at the moment, but just continue on towards the doorway at the far end. In this room, once you get close, a Skulltula will fall from the ceiling, and the trick to defeating these guys is you have to actually just use an upward slice. So just point the Wiimote down and then swing upwards, and this will cause you to use an upward stroke, which will flip the Skulltula over, which allows you to reach its tender bottom side, and then you can defeat it. And you may have actually dealt with some of those Skulltulas earlier when you were back out in the main room. There's different ways you could have dealt with that. Now, if you got hurt, you can actually use the hearts that were inside one of the crates on the far side of the room. But otherwise, you want to climb up the vines, and the other crate is actually a metal one that does not shatter when it falls to the ground. I'm going to go ahead and release this, then push it off the ledge, and then lure it over to the middle where there is actually several of those ice entries. You want to make sure you stand on it and then position the block a little bit well. Basically, just keep pressing it until it bonks against this wall here, and then push it over to the right until you think it's close enough anyways. You might have to move the box around a little bit, but it's not too bad. But anyways, once you get to a point where you can stand like where all 3 of them can see you, then you want to use your sword. And here my calibration was really weird, so I tried to fix it, and it still was calibrated a little bit to the right. So what I ended up doing is I just kind of tilted my body a little bit to the left instead, so that my circles were, see what I mean? My circles are like pointing more to the right, so I just tilted my body to the left a little bit, so that way the center of my circle was like pointing towards them. A little bit weird, but anyways, just be aware of that. If your calibration is weird, that might be why you're having problems at this point. So I just kind of worked around it in this case because I didn't want to keep trying to recalibrate over and over again. But yeah, defeat the ice entry things and then open the chest to get a small key, which allows us to enter the door that's on the east side of the dungeon instead. So now you just want to work your way out the room. I always forget, I think I have to climb here and I don't, but go ahead and go through the door, and to get back, what you have to do is use the Beetle on the switch on the very far side of the room. Now, if you use the Beetle on the cobwebs here, if you smack too many of the cobwebs, you'll actually release the Skulltula, which you don't have to defeat it at all. But you can totally sneak in between the cobwebs. It doesn't really matter very much, but go ahead and smack the crystal switch. This will raise the water level in this room, which allows us to reach the upper level instead. Now, as I've explained and shown a couple times so far, you can actually just roll through these cobwebs. You don't actually have to deal with them usually. And even if you do touch the cobweb as you're rolling through it, usually it only binds onto you a little bit if you try and avoid most of it. So in this case, I rolled through on that left side, and so I was able to just shake free almost instantaneously, honestly. If you walk through it, it catches you for a long time, but if you roll through it, it only catches you for an instant. You just immediately start shaking your nunchuck and stuff. And one other thing to note is if you do release a Skulltula and you flip it up like that, then when you're jumping into it like that to perform a fatal blow, if you're touching a cobweb when that happens, you'll get stuck, and the Skulltula could come back to life, and it will start attacking you before you can release yourself from the cobwebs. So just a quick note about that. So what I did is I flipped it over, and then I moved out of the way of the cobwebs before I performed a fatal blow so that I didn't get stuck. Continuing on, exit through the doorway, then continue to the far side of the dungeon this time, and the keys might follow you here at this point, and I would defeat the Bokoblin because it's probably going to chase after you otherwise. But go ahead and take care of that. And then on this far side, you'll see that there's actually some ropes here that you want to tightrope across, as well as the locked door. So this is where we need to use our key. Now there's a bunch of Deku Babas, though, that are on the ceiling. So to defeat them, what you want to do is just simply use the Beetle to slice through all of their vines, their stems or whatever. And you only need to worry about the middle ones. The ones on the left and the right don't matter at all. There's actually a pit below, so if you fall down, there's some vines you can climb up. But there's nothing interesting down there, so just go ahead and open the locked door and continue onwards into this next room. I think this next room is super exciting because this is the first time they introduce a new enemy called a Staldra. And how these work is they're like Hydras, like that legend implies. If you defeat a head, then it just regrows, and you have to defeat all the heads at once in order to defeat this monster. So I did actually get Phi's description of this monster because it's just unique. And it explains how to defeat them. But one interesting thing to know about them, they will like kind of move at different angles and stuff like that, so either diagonal or horizontal, but usually the head's lined up horizontal is what happens the most often, just generally speaking. Their eyes will turn red right before they attack, but otherwise their eyes are blue when they're vulnerable. But something to know, actually, as far as the easiest way to defeat them is actually when you smack a head and they come back to life, they'll always have their heads completely horizontal. So the fastest way to defeat them actually is just to smack them and let them regrow on purpose. And then when they're like, huh, they swing their heads back around, and after they've regrown, they're always horizontal. So they're always just lined up in a row. So all you have to do is smack them, and then just wait for a good time, and then just slash them horizontally, and that will defeat them instantly. So that's the fastest way to defeat them. You can actually also use a shield bash, I believe. I think that just stuns them, though. I don't think that actually like leaves them in a vulnerable position. Unlike most enemies in the game, that doesn't actually create an opening for you. Once you defeat it, go ahead and open the next door, and there's a Bokoblin here that you want to probably take care of. I would recommend that you recalibrate your controller right here. The Beetle is based on your sword calibration, so if your sword is really uncalibrated, then it's very hard to steer the Beetle. So here I'm fixing my calibration until my sword is back in the middle of my screen. That's pretty good, but that's alright. That's doable. It's doable. It's pretty good. In order to jump across here, we have to make the Skulltula go away because it will prevent us from progressing. There is actually a way to swing it, like smack it with your sword to make it swing back and forth. You can jump across, but it's very, very difficult. So what you want to do is you want to release its cobwebbing that's holding it up with the Beetle. This allows you to jump across. Now, before you continue onwards, I always forget about this. You want to hit the crystal switch that's above the doorway so that we can create a shortcut to this room. So if you ever have to leave, go get some fairies, whatever, before the boss, or some potions or whatever, then you want to do that. Then you can have this shortcut so you can get back easily. And remember that you can use all of the bird statues, which I guess they're called that. I don't know, they're bird statue wannabes. But continuing onwards, you want to go ahead and use the tightrope, and again, here is another Bokoblin that's going to get on here. And this one actually calls a separate one. It has a horn, and it calls another Bokoblin from the far side as well. So if you're not careful, you can't back up at this point, because there's another one there too. But what I recommend to get rid of them is to just lean off to one side, either the left or the right, and this will allow you to like fall off on purpose, and you can swing the Wiimote to dangle Link's legs or whatever, and that will cause some damage or whatever. Now, something interesting to know is you can actually use Skyward Strikes when you're on land to smack these guys. In hero mode, you can actually reach far enough, you can smack that Bokoblin from the far side, actually, because you have increased range on your Skyward Strike. So defeat the other Bokoblin that's coming back from the other direction if you like, then enter the doorway on the far left where there is a small chest containing 20 rupees. And I feel like I remember there being a fairy here, like before the boss, but I don't actually see any jars near the doorway, and there's none in these two alcoves, so I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just misremembering that, but I feel like the last couple playthroughs too, I did this. I remember getting a fairy here all the time, but then the last couple playthroughs I didn't see a fairy, so maybe it's all in my head and I'm misremembering. But anyways, I'm going to continue onwards. Smack the bottom of this rope here where it will release it, and just wait for the rope to swing close enough to you, then make a jump for it, and then swing with the Wiimote until you can hop over to this ledge. Climb up the vines, follow this little path, and at this point you can either use the Beetle to smack these vines, or you can use the slingshot. The slingshot you might have to raise a little bit, aim a little bit higher than the vines because of the fall-off range. Now these vines are super difficult. I'm not really sure quite what the problem is. I think the deal is, and at least I tend to fall down here a lot, and I think a lot of other players do too. So the trick to getting through this is actually to wait for the farthest distance of the swinging vines. Like, people tend to release early. So you wait until, like, Link's at the very far edge of his swing, and that'll be fine. So like in this case, you saw it was great. Now you can hold down the B button, and while holding it, then you can turn, but you can also go up and down. So if you hold down the B, and then press down on the analog stick, you can go down the vine until you're further to the bottom, so you can swing further. Once you finally make it all the way across, you will be able to open the chest to get the golden carving, which is the boss key of this type of game. So they have different types of keys that are these weird three-dimensional shapes. I want to climb up the nearby vines and then hover over, and something you can do real quick if you like, if you got some of these glittering spores, then you can actually make your own fairies. Now, I did not see any fairies below, but there's another option. Now, one comment about this is, like, this glittering spores are super misleading. Like, I feel you just have to get super close to the heart to make it work. But anyways, you can use glittering spores to turn a heart into a fairy. And glittering spores come from sparkling mushrooms. If you ever see sparkling mushrooms that are in Faron, then you want to smack them with your sword, and then it makes these sparkly spores that float around, and you can gather those with a bottle. Now, they're really cool because they give you 5 charges each time, and the most useful thing for them is definitely to create fairies. So if you have multiple bottles or whatever, you can fill them up. Now, right now we have a revitalizing potion. I do think that's worth keeping because this boss can damage your shield quite a bit. Go ahead and save if you like, and then you can actually go out and go get more potions or whatever you want outside, or more seeds or something like that before the boss. We don't actually use the slingshot for this boss. But anyways, go ahead and go up to the door, and what you want to do is actually just rotate your, press A, rotate the Wiimote until the key is lined up. You might have to maneuver it around quite a bit until you find the right position, but this one looks like an H is the goal, so that tiny little point that's sticking off by itself, you just want that to point up. So once you get it lined up right, press A to push it into the slot. This will open the door, and then just enjoy this following cutscene where we will confront the boss of the temple. Alright, so here we have the first boss of the game, the Demon Lord Ghirahim, and how this works is he sticks his hand out and it's glowing red, and that means he's guarding. And so if you smack into his hand, he'll actually counterattack by grabbing your sword, and then if you don't move, you can wiggle your Wiimote to stop letting him hold onto your sword like that. But if you don't move your Wiimote at all, you don't struggle against it, then he'll actually pull the sword out of your grasp and taunt you, and then eventually throw it at you. You can dodge out of the way or just run really fast or whatever away from him, and then that way you don't get hurt with it. But anyways, go pick up your sword again if that happens. And how this works is what you need to do is hold the sword in a particular direction, and then after a little bit he snaps to that location and he won't keep tracking you. So you just hold your sword still for a bit, then move to the opposite side and smack him. Now personally what I like to do is I actually will go in circles. So I move the sword around, then I hold still, then move in circles, and when I'm on the opposite side, then you smack him. So just slash away a bunch of times and just keep chasing after him. That's the entire first phase. For the second phase, he summons his sword, and he often will teleport behind you. When he does this, he's usually towards the middle of the arena, and if you get too far away from him, he will charge at you. And what you want to do is actually just shield bash at the right time. That's the easiest way to deal with that. You can dodge to the side, but that is a little bit awkward, and you can technically counter it with spin attacks as well, though that's very difficult as well. So just stand really far away and shield bash. Now in this case, I shield bashed too late, but that's the easiest way to deal with that, and that's why the shield is very useful for this boss battle. Occasionally he will summon these kunai that he will shoot at you, and what you want to do is use vertical or horizontal sword slashes, whatever direction they're coming from. So again, you shield bash. Again, I did it a little bit too late. And what happens, every time he teleports away, he will guard from a particular direction. If you actually hit him from the direction he's guarding from, which usually he's guarding from the direction your Wiimote is currently pointed in, so you just want to very carefully, slowly move it to the other direction, then you can actually attack him and counter it. Or you can also use a shield bash to counter that as well. But usually it's pretty easy after he teleports to, he'll always appear behind you. Just be ready to attack from a direction other than the one he's facing you from. So there I was trying to do a spin attack, but somehow he was starting from the top, but somehow it still hit me. Now as a comment, just like with the Stalfos, if you can hit him with a regular attack, it's always better to use Shake Your Nunchuck too, so you do spin attacks. Like, if he's vulnerable, you just hit him with spin attacks to start it out, and you do additional damage anyway. When he throws out these kunai, he actually usually comes from all different directions, but it honestly doesn't really matter what it is. If you use a shield bash, I think it's a little bit easier than sword slashes, honestly. So a shield bash is much easier to counterattack that. And you can, when he teleports behind you, you can counterattack with a shield bash as well, rather than running away or just trying to attack him fast enough. So you can, if your timing might be a little bit easier to use shield bash. So I used my revitalizing potion to heal my shield. This wasn't strictly necessary, but I was just trying to show how useful it can be. Now, I did have a bottle of glittering spores. Unfortunately, you have to get really close to hearts to make them function properly, but there's all these jars along the side of the boss arena, and you can use them to catch fairies. So you can use the glittering spores. You have to get really, really close to the heart before it disappears, and then pour the glittering spores on it to turn it into a fairy and get scooped up in a bottle. Kunai can just totally be sidestepped as well, and I will say that generally speaking, I feel like the easiest way to deal with Ghirahim, honestly, is just to run forward. Now, if you want to continue Z targeting, honestly, an easy way to do this is just to keep doing a jump attack towards him, so you can hold forward on the analog stick and press A to jump forward, and then what you can do, it's kind of interesting, you can like hold your Wiimote off to the right side, for example, so that's where your Wiimote is calibrated to, and he'll try to defend from the right or even from bottom, but when you're jumping with A, if you slash the Wiimote at all, you'll attack from the top. So it's kind of this interesting thing where you can taunt him into like defending from the bottom or the sides, but then you actually end up attacking him from the top just because when you swing, when you're running, or when you're jumping forward with Z and A, you'll always attack from the top. So it's sort of this interesting thing where you can get past his defenses that way. So I actually think one of the easiest ways to close the distance with Ghirahim, when he especially was trying to use kunai or whatever, you just kind of like keep hopping forward, hop, 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 and you just swing really quick and you can actually get past his defenses. It's kind of a little trick that kind of works against the mechanics of how this boss battle works. Technically, he's also vulnerable when he's charging towards you. Actually, like even though he's slashing at you with his sword, you can technically like hit him with a well-timed spin attack, but the timing on it is very difficult. So I think a shield bash is far more reliable. But yeah, just another comment that you can defeat him very quickly with spin attacks after he charges you. So one thing you want to do real quick is, as long as you're passing through here, it's good to scoop up some birds, because there's actually 3 different locations in this area that have birds. There's 2 of the platforms towards the end, and then the one first platform at the beginning has birds on them. And birds will actually reappear every about 20 seconds, so you can kind of just move around in circles or whatever in the water, and then hop back, and you can scoop up more birds to get more feathers. In particular, it's because you want to get blue birds is what you're looking for ideally. In the back, there's some more fairies towards the left waterfall, and so you can scoop those up with either the bottle directly, or you can use the bug-catching net. And then lastly, the thing that you really, really want to do before you leave is you want to Skyward Strike the Goddess Cube in the back. And this third Goddess Cube leads to a chest in the sky that has 300 rupees. But anyways, we're going to go get that later, and so yeah, that's awesome, 300 rupees, super easy. Now, if you do manage to screw this up or whatever, and you don't actually get it, it's okay, because we are actually going to be coming back to the Skyview Temple later in the game. So you can just, if you forgot it and you just went ahead and you hit the Goddess Crest, you can actually run all the way back through, since we made all those shortcuts. It's pretty easy to get back to this boss room, it's not that big a deal. But otherwise, we will return here to the Skyview Temple later in the game, so you can get that Goddess Cube at that time. And like I was just explaining, the birds will reappear, and there is actually, because bluebirds have a smaller chance. I'm not sure what that is, a 1 out of 5 chance for there to be a bluebird in there or less or something like that. You can actually just keep walking back and forth and keep catching birds until you have enough bird feathers and or you have enough bluebird feathers in particular. It's just that this is the most like compact area where you find the most number of birds in a small space, so it's a lot easier to find what you're looking for, I guess. But that is a little bit awkward because the platforms are a little spread apart, though. But I will say, though, the number of bird feathers you need there, you need 5 regular ones and 5 blue ones in total for all of the upgrades in the game. And then I guess that also depends on what you want to upgrade. If you're going to upgrade everything with me, they need 5 of each. So you can do that here. This will be the fastest, easiest place to get them. When you're all ready, go ahead and Skyward Strike the Goddess Crest up ahead. Yeah, by the way, Pete, so check this out. So this is from Zelda Dungeon. So this is a map of everything in the game. This is might totally spoil it for you, but if you get to a point, especially where you're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, the AFK death. Sorry, Corbin, I tried. It's so sad. But yes, Zelda Dungeon.